I'm Dr. Afrin Rajai, and in this lecture, I'm going to review Bowenian family therapy. Bowen developed his theory back in 40s and 50s, and Bowen was the first one to realize that the history of our family creates a sort of like template which shapes the values, thoughts, and experience of each generation, as well as how that generation passes down these things to the next generation. So he was a medical doctor and the oldest child in a large family in Tennessee, and then he studied schizophrenia and thinking the cause of it could be about mother-child relationship, which create this anxious and unhealthy attachment. Then he moved from studying diets. Diets are two-way relationships like parent-child, partners, parent-parent, to triads, which is three-way relationships such as parent-parent-child or grandparent-parent-child, something like that after that. So Bowen's theory focuses on the balance of two forces. The first is togetherness and the second is individuality. He believed that too much togetherness creates fusion and prevents individuality or developing one's own sense of self. And then too much individuality results in a distance and kind of like a different pattern of a family. Crucial concepts in Bowen theory is differentiation. And differentiation is really about self, right? So it's the ability to separate feelings and thoughts. And it's the balance between the two forces that I mentioned in the previous slide, togetherness and individuality, right? So too much togetherness can create fusion, and too much individuality can result in a distant family, right? So because of that, differentiated people are better able to handle ups and downs of intimacy and, in general, the complexity of relationships, right? So undifferentiated people cannot sometimes separate feelings and thoughts. So when you ask them about what do you think or what they're thinking, they are flooded with feelings and they have difficulty thinking logically. And furthermore, they have difficulty separating their own feelings from others' feelings. So they look to family or friends or peer groups to define how they think about issues, about feel about people and about their experiences, right? So differentiation is the process of freeing yourself from your family's processes to define yourself. This means being able to have different opinion, values, to think differently. If you disagree with someone, you can say so, right? You can talk about your opinions and feelings. And it's about being able to stay emotionally at the same time connected to people, right? So to your family or to your friends. So again, like one way that it can manifest itself is that when you have disagreement or ups and downs of relationship intimacy, you are able to calmly reflect on a conflicted interaction, right? And then realizing your own role in that interaction or situation, and then choose a different response for the future. That is why this differentiation of self, this concept, is very, very important in Bowen's theory, because it also, it has to do with all these other concepts and interventions, and kind of like the way that Bowen looks at a concept of family and, relationship in general. Central concepts in Bowenian therapy, and the first one or another one of that is nuclear family emotional system. So nuclear family emotional system is about the emotional patterns that are actually passed down to generations to come. So for example, if one of the parents, if they have some sort of illness, mental or physical, and because of that they feel like the family or themselves, they're not stable, because of that they always should be prepared for the worst case scenario, and they should always expect worst case scenario, and they teach that to their children, right? And then their children grew up kind of like with that mindset and with that pattern, and they think that that makes sense, in XY situation that was actually very helpful, so it makes a lot of sense. So the children, they grow up and they teach the same thing to their children, right? Without realizing that maybe a pattern or behavior or belief that they did in the past or they had in the past was functional at some point, but it's not functional anymore. It's not helpful anymore. It doesn't make sense anymore. But they still, no matter what, they still keep doing that because of this like nuclear family emotional system, because this emotional pattern was actually passed down to them and to the next generation. So I think that all of us, we have some experiences with that in our own families, right? And in other words, like one other way of talking about this is about patterns and behaviors that have been helpful in an occasion, in a situation, at some point in our lives, right? And then they are not helpful anymore. They are not functional anymore. They are not, they don't make sense anymore. But we keep doing them. We keep following them just because, we maybe we are used to them, or we grew up with them and they are, passed down. They were passed down to us. So that is about nuclear family emotional system. The next concept is family projection process, and this is a part of the nuclear family emotional system, because the family member who was or who has the problem, right? So, for example, a father who has phobia, right? So that identified client. The family member who has the problem has to stabilize the family and not transfer the anxiety and problematic behavior to the next generation. So, for example, if in a family, like the mom has a specific point of view, or thinks that we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario, kind of like a pessimistic view, right? So the son who rejects his mother's point of view may find his mother and maybe another sibling, sister, become closer as they agree that the son is immature and irresponsible, right? So the more they share this view with him, the more it makes him feel excluded and shapes how he sees himself. So about that situation, or in that situation, he may, I don't know, behave more and more irresponsibly, right? So he may reject and constantly trying to prove himself to be mature and responsible, but failing to, at the same time, gain his family's approval, right? Because they do not, whatever achievement he has, they do not see as a manifestation of his he being mature, right? So this is really interesting, because at the end of the day, the son might turn to substance abuse as he becomes more and more irresponsible, or as he struggles to never meeting his family's expectation, right? So that is about the family projection process. The next concept is emotional cutoff. And emotional cutoff, according to Bowen's theory, is when a family member decides to move away and cut himself off from the family completely, right? So very, very distant, and we call that emotional cutoff. And you can see now how this concept can have to do with all these other concepts that we are talking about family projection process, about nuclear family emotional systems, about differentiation, right? The next concept is triangles, and triangles is basically when two members of the family are having some issues, either because of individuality or togetherness, and ask a third party to intervene, right? So a common example of that is when you see two partners with their children, and so you see that there is this tension between mom and dad, or two partners, the parents, and because of that tension, they kind of like bring the child into this triangle, and they try to one of them try to take sides, or bring the child to their side in the fight, right? So there's a tension between two partners, and because the tension is is very hard to tolerate, right? Because of that, they bring another person to this dynamic, then they are making this triangle to intervene, right? So basically they are sharing the pain or the tension with that third person in the dynamic. So triangles are the basic units of the systems, right? So as we talked about, dyads, are unstable, and as two people will, have all these different interactions, closeness and distance, ups and downs in a relationship. They may feel distress. They may feel like these are like intense emotions, and because of that, they will seek a third person to triangulate, right? So again, like that example between a couple and their children, or sometimes one of the in-laws, is a great example of that. So again, like think about all these different concepts in a systemic way. So people who are more undifferentiated are likely to triangulate others and be triangulated. People who are differentiated cope well with life and relationship stress, and because of that, they are less likely to triangulate others or be triangulated. So think of the person who can listen to the best friend's relationship problems without telling that friend to what to do, or they just listen and validate the experience, right? So instead, the differentiated person can tell the best friend, you can be intimidating at those times, or I agree with you, but you won't change your partner. Some sort of those examples when you're thinking about differentiation and a person who is not differentiated. The next concept is multi-generational transmission process. So Bowen theory actually talks about the fact that patterns, themes, and roles in a family are passed down to generations to come depending on how much triangling has happened between the parents and the child. And that is about multi-generational transmission in a family. So this process actually entails the way family emotional processes are transferred and maintained over the generations. This is about how the whole family joins in the family projection process, right? So, for example, by reinforcing the beliefs of the family as a family continues this pattern over generations, also refer to back to previous generations, right? So, for example, he's just like his uncle, right, Jack, or he's always irresponsible too, or she's just like your cousin, I don't know, Sarah. She was divorced for 4 times, right? So that's about multi-generational transmission processes. Then we have sibling positionings, and Bowen has focused on the position of each sibling. For example, if you are the middle child, you are the youngest, you are the oldest, right? And their relationship in which sibling position triangles with the parents the most. So Bowen really stressed siblings order, believing that each child had a place in the family, in the hierarchy of family, right? So because of that, more or less, it's likely to fit in some projection in the family. So the oldest sibling was more likely to be seen as overly responsible and mature, and the youngest as overly irresponsible and immature, for example. And that is, another concept in Bowen's theory. The next concept is societal emotional process, and these processes are social expectations about racial and class groups, and the behaviors for each gender, the nature of sexual orientation, etc., and their effect on family, right? So when you think about how families they can deal with discrimination, all these different things that are going on in our society, they must pass on to their children the ways they learn to survive these factors, right? So the coping practices of the parents and extended family may lead to more or less adaptive emotional health for the family and its members. And that is, another concept in Bowen's theory. The other concept that sometimes people they talk about a family disorder, sometimes they just talk about chronic anxiety. But overall, Bowen believed that family problems result from emotional fusion or from an increase in the level of anxiety in the family. So typically, the member with the symptom is the least differentiated member of the family, and thus because of that, the one who has the least ability to resist the pull to become, fused with another member, or has the least ability to separate their own um, thoughts and feelings from those of, the other family members. Because of that, this whole, dynamic and, family disorders can may happen, and it's important how we look at that and how we kind of like interpret that when we are working with families, right? So Bowen again like believes that families face two kinds of problems. Vertical problems are passed down from parent to child, and because of that, adults who had cold or distant relationship with their parents do not know how to have warm or close relationship with their children. And so pass down they may pass down their own problems to their children. And then we have horizontal problems, which are caused by environmental stressors or transitions that they happen in the family development or during that time. So this may result from trauma such as a chronic illness or loss of the family home or the death of a family member. So again, like it's important to talk about all these different things and to be aware of them and to know that all people they experience anxiety, right? So it's a response. Anxiety is kind of like uh, our response to a real or imagined threat, right? And Bowen believed that all living things experience anxiety in some form, and he sometimes used chronic anxiety interchangeably with emotional reactivity. So they both involve physical manifestations such as heart rate, blood pressure changes, or fight or flight responses, or kind of like fear sensation. And many forms of anxiety can change our response to what we are seeing, what we are dealing with, right? And again, like there's this specific quote from Bowen that says, while the specific events or issues are often principal generators of acute anxiety, the principal generators of chronic anxiety are people's reaction to a disturbance in the balance of a relationship system, which again, like all of this emphasizes the importance of family system, uh, the nuclear family, the patterns that we pass down to generation, and again, like what we are doing with anxiety when it exists in our relationship, right? Do we try to, um, bring another person and share the anxiety with them like triangulation? Do we experience chronic anxiety? And chronic anxiety, it's different from acute anxiety, right? So acute anxiety is a response to a real threat and is of short duration, right? So chronic anxiety is a response to, and it can be a response to, and even like when it's not real, the threat is not there, right? So you just imagine that and has a more kind of like long-lasting quality for the person. So life events may disturb the balance in a family system, but once is disturbed, family members may react more to the disturbance in the relationship system than to the events themselves. And chronic anxiety can exceed a person or family's ability to cope with it. In Bowen's theory, genograms can be used as an assessment and also intervention. So you can use genogram, which is a sort of family tree with like it's like visualized, right, with all these different key or symbols that hopefully show multi-generational processes, right? So it's kind of like a way of describing emotional dynamics in a family, right? So sometimes you can use that as an assessment, which like you do the genogram with your clients, with families, at like while they are in your session, and you use a paper or whiteboard, and you start asking questions and draw the genogram, so you get an idea about all these different patterns that may go on or exist in this family over generations, right? Different generations. So that's about assessment, and it can be also an intervention, especially if you really believed in that relationship that you have with your clients, and kind of like you have this systemic perspective, and you want to promote that perspective. So the way that you use the genogram as an intervention is when you draw the genogram with clients, and then at the same time you use that to help clients to gain insight about what's going on, right? So sometimes clients, when they are in your session and you do the genogram, they have aha moments, right? So or they tell you, wow, I never thought about it, or I never pay attention to that, or now I can see what's happening here. And that is an intervention itself when you use it. So it can be very, very helpful. And even like if you are using all these other models in therapy, still genograms could be a very helpful way for you to show clients the different patterns, right? And we have, just a side note, that we have standardized symbols about genograms, right? About male, female, all these different things. There are also some of the patterns or things that you may want to use, and you can just make it up yourself, the symbol, right? Or the pattern. And it is totally fine as long as you have a key for that in your genogram and for your clients. Goals in Bowenian therapy. The first one is increasing differentiation, and I think it makes a lot of sense based on what we have talked about so far. And the second one is about decreasing emotional reactivity to chronic anxiety. So again, like as we mentioned it before, as differentiation increases, anxiety decreases, right? But if we want to talk about goals in kind of like more details, another goal that we can talk about is helping family or the system to reframe the presenting problem as a multi-generational problem that is caused by factors beyond the individual. Usually when we see families, when we see clients, they have an identified kind of like patient problem client, right? So the whole family or couples, they come to you and they give you this story, and in this story there's this one person who is actually the reason of all these different problems. So we need to help them from Bowenian perspective. We really need to promote systemic perspective and help them to reframe the problem as a multi-generational problem rather than just an individual, right? So the other goal, the other thing that we can do, or the other goal that we can have, is using the therapist as part of a healthy triangle, where the therapist teaches the couple to manage their own anxiety and distance and closeness in healthy ways, right? So as a therapist, you kind of go to that triangle with couples, with clients that you are seeing, but it's very different from what I call unconscious triangles, right? So this one is a very kind of like intended triangle that you want to be part of, but it's healthy because you want to teach them something about anxiety, distance, boundaries, and closeness, right? So that is very different. The other goal that we can have is forming relationships with the family member with their problem, quote unquote, to help them separate from the family and resist unhealthy triangulation and emotional fusion. The other goal that we can have is opening close ties with cutoff members. Again, like that includes many conversations on differentiations, boundaries, closeness, togetherness, distance, all these different things. But at the end of the day, hopefully we can help them with, cutoff members. The other goal is focusing on more than the problem and including the overall health and happiness of the family, right? Again, like that systemic perspective, that diversity perspective. Another goal that we can have is evaluating progress of the family in terms of how they function now, as well as how adaptive they can be to future changes, right? And then the last one is addressing the power differentiation. differential in a heterosexual couple based on differences, right? So for example, in, I don't know, for example, economic power and gender role socialization, which, there are things that we want to talk about in therapy, right? So helping them to see the power differentiation, or the power dynamic when they talk about all these different things, because again, like it has to do with boundaries, with differentiation, with closeness, with distance, all these different things. And those are some of the goals that we can work on with clients, families, systems when we are working based on Bowen therapy or Bowenian approach. Finally, what are some of the interventions in Bowenian therapy or approach? So the first one is Genogram that we already talked about, right? It's a graphic of a family that includes information about history, relationship, illness, psychology patterns, all these different things. And so you can use a Genogram to explore these patterns and connection to, guide treatment. So you can create a genogram at the start of therapy and continue to add information throughout the course of treatment. So it is not just a one-time thing in Bowenian approach. The next intervention could be differentiation, right? And promoting differentiation, self-differentiation, and also differentiating emotions. So you can help clients and family and systems identify the emotions that they have within the family unit and note when they are taking on the emotions of other family members, right? So this is really important because this technique can help, involves helping each family members recognizing their individual emotions and identities alongside their role in the family unit. So again, it's that, promoting and helping clients and families and system with differentiation. Another intervention could be I statements, and it's a way of communication and technique that emphasizes the emotions of the speaker rather than the attributes of the other person, right? So the goal is to communicate the emotion behind the statement rather than bringing up defensiveness or feelings of blame in the listener. So for example, instead of saying you never help me, or you're always lazy, or you are like this and that, the client would be encouraged to rephrase that and say something like, I feel overwhelmed with chores and would like more help, right? Or I feel stressed out with our financial situation and would like more Venus or help in that. The next intervention is triangles. And so again, like as I mentioned before, triangulation in family therapy refers to a form of kind of like manipulation in which members can get against each other. But Bowenian family therapy can use this concept of emotional triangles to kind of like symbolize a stable relationship network. So families work to create healthy balance and support in these emotional triangles, and family therapists, you as a therapist, can be part of this healthy triangulation and teach clients and systems how to deal with how to deal with anxiety, tension, distance, togetherness, all these different things. The next intervention is intergenerational patterns, and it's about using the genogram that would work to identify patterns persisting between generations and help families and systems identify which patterns benefit them and which patterns they want to change and break down. So again, like if you remember in the first slides, I talked about some of the behaviors or patterns that were functional at some point in our lives in families, and they are not functional anymore, and kind of like helping families to recognize that and change those patterns in their system. And the last one is normalizing challenges, which, in this technique, Bowenian family therapists, you can, emphasize that challenges and conflicts will be there in your life, in your relationship, in your family, even after therapy ends, right? So you as a therapist, you can prepare clients to face future difficulties before they arise. And that is, another intervention in Bowenian therapy. As always in all of my lectures, if you have watched them, in the last slide, I talk about diversity and culture and encourage you to pause and think about the role of diversity and culture in a theory that you are learning, right? So I am doing the same thing here. So pause and think about the role of diversity and culture in Bowenian therapy or theory. I always, tell my students, and when I talk about all these theories, that pay attention, promote your critical thinking, and when you are learning these theories, pay attention who developed them, their social location factors, and when it was developed, right? So 50 years ago, our diversity training was very different from now, right? So because of that, again, still you can be loyal to a theory and use that, but modified it with the today's diversity training and cultural perspective. I just mentioned one thing about Bowenian theory and then or approach, and then I leave the rest for you to think about. But just think about all these different ways of seeing or thinking about families as healthy and unhealthy, and good and bad, and functional and dysfunctional, and um, just ask yourself, what if some of these things that we are talking about, specifically in Bowen's theory about enmeshed boundaries or fusion or togetherness or distance, what if like these concepts, these words have different meaning or has different meaning in another culture, in another country, for some other people? Do we still need to force and interpret that as unhealthy, as not helpful, even though it's working for some people? So I just leave you with that question and reflection. And again, like I want you to think about the role of diversity and culture in this lecture that you just watched or listened to. And leave me some comments if you have any questions, any reflection, any sort of anything that stood out to you or sounded maybe challenging. Thank you for watching this series. Stay tuned for my other lectures.